Max Verstappen is preparing to walk away from Formula One, not because Red Bull is slow, not because he has lost his edge, because the sport he loves no longer feels like racing. The paddock knows it, the teams feel it, and this week, everything changed. The FIA called an emergency summit in London. 6 regulation changes sit on the table. One crash at Suzuka, captured on live broadcast, just erased every excuse for waiting. What no broadcast covered is this: the 2026 Formula was supposed to be the future. Smaller cars, active wings, a new generation of power units. Instead, drivers are managing battery deployment like accountants, not racers. Qualifying has become an energy spreadsheet. Russell's pole in Melbourne was 3.5 seconds slower than Norris in 2025 on the same track. That gap was never in the plan. And that is where this story gets complicated. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. If the drivers all agree the car is broken, why have the rules not changed yet? The answer involves politics, power, and a deadline that is closer than you think. Miami is less than 2 weeks after the April 20th summit. The current regulations cannot run on a street circuit without fixes. This is the part that changes everything, and what the drivers are saying next will shock you. Max Verstappen called it anti-driving. Lando Norris warned someone is going over the barrier. Charles Leclerc screamed on the radio that pushing harder makes him slower. This is not one star having a bad weekend. This is the entire grid speaking with one voice. When the best drivers in the world all describe the same problem in different words. The problem is real, and the FIA knew about it long before Suzuka. Fernando Alonso joked his team's chef could now drive spoon curve because the fastest corners became charging zones. Sergio Perez, rarely critical in public, called the racing very fake. Oliver Behrman's 50G impact was not a racing incident. It was the math of 50 km/h closing speeds finally catching up with reality. Carlos Sainz and the GPDA filed warnings for months. The FIA archived them as theoretical, but theory just hit a concrete barrier at 200 mph. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. If every driver outside the top 2 teams agrees the formula is broken, why does the car behave this way in the first place? The answer is not in the cockpit. It is in the engineering decisions that turned energy management into a survival game. The power unit specs, the aero zones, the battery limits. And that is where this story gets complicated. What the computers missed is about to change everything. Mercedes knew the numbers did not add up before the first race even started. The 2026 power unit cuts 150 kilowatts from the combustion engine and adds 230 kilowatts from the battery. For the first time, almost half the power down a straight comes from stored energy, not fuel. That shift sounds clean on paper, but on track, it turned every corner into a calculation and every straight into a gamble. Drivers are not just racing anymore. They are managing a system that fights their instincts. The MGU-H is gone. The MGU-K now delivers 350 kilowatts. Active wings switch between high downforce and low drag in zones the FIA defines, not the driver. Fuel loads dropped from 110 kilograms to just 70. That fuel costs more than 250 euros per liter. The superclipping limit of 250 kilowatts forces drivers to lift and coast just to charge. Russell's pole in Melbourne was 3.5 seconds slower than Norris in 2025. The FIA projected a gap of 1 to 2.5 seconds. The data tells a completely different story, but here is what the paddock is not talking about. The simulators missed how energy cycles would interact with real-world racing. Teams reported instability in preseason testing. The FIA called it driver adaptation. Now, is that gap between prediction and reality is creating speed differentials no one can control. And that is where this story gets complicated. Oliver Behrman's Haas hit the wall at Spoon Curve with a force of 50 G. Not in testing, not in practice. During the race, on live television, he had just passed Franco Colapinto's Alpine when the speed difference between them reached 50 km/h. One car in deployment mode, one in conservation mode. Same piece of asphalt, less than 1 second to react. The impact launched the Haas over the Alpine's rear wheel and into the Tech Pro barriers. The race stopped immediately, but this was never just about one crash. Andrea Stella made safety the non-negotiable priority in every technical meeting after Melbourne. For McLaren's data showed the energy mode speed differentials were creating closing speeds no driver could manage. The GPDA had warned about this exact scenario for months. Carlos Sainz led the briefings. The FIA filed the reports as theoretical risk. Then Suzuka proved theory has consequences. Baku's turn 15 has even less runoff than spoon curve. Singapore's turn 7 is narrower. Las Vegas has concrete walls inches from the racing line. The number the FIA did not publish was the risk assessment for street circuits under these rules. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. If the data predicted this crash and the drivers warned about it, why did the rules stay unchanged? The answer sits in a room in London where team principals vote on regulation changes. And the teams winning under the current rules have no reason to fix them. This is the part that changes everything. Mercedes has won every race so far in 2026. Kimi Antonelli, just 19 years old and in his rookie season, sits atop the championship with 72 points. George Russell has stood on the podium after every single Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, now at Ferrari, calls these regulations the best racing he has ever experienced. When the teams winning under the current rules are asked to change them, the answer is always the same. Why fix what is working for you? But here is what the paddock is not talking about. The F1 Commission requires unanimous approval for mid-season regulation changes. That means Mercedes and Ferrari effectively hold veto power over any fix. Red Bull is fighting in the lower midfield. Max Verstappen's contract reportedly includes a clause tied to his championship position by the summer break. If he sits outside the top 4 in July, he can walk. The April 20th summit brings every team principal and manufacturer to the table. Miami is the deadline. Changes must be approved and implemented before May 3rd. The data tells a completely different story about who benefits from delay. But here's what the paddock is not talking about. The FIA holds a rarely used authority to bypass the commission when safety is at stake. That power has never been tested in a crisis like this. If Mercedes and Ferrari block changes that protect drivers, does the FIA step in alone? This is the part that changes everything. Once, Audi entered Formula 1 because the 2026 regulations promised a future aligned with their road car strategy. General Motors signed on to build a power unit for Cadillac's 2028 entry. Both bets were placed on electrification. Both investments exceed $200 million. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. If the FIA scales back the electric component to fix the racing, do those manufacturers still see a return? The number Audi did not publish was their contingency plan if the formula changes. Mohammed Ben Sulayem has reportedly pushed for V8 engine discussions targeting 2029. That timeline sits just 3 years after the 2026 launch. A fan poll after Suzuka showed 72% demanding immediate regulation changes. Only 6% were fully satisfied. Sustainable fuel costs more than €250 per liter. Teams cannot simply burn more to fix performance gaps. The data tells a completely different story about the business case. If the product on track feels broken, why would a manufacturer tie their brand to it? But here is what the paddock is not talking about. The FIA is trapped between fixing the show for fans and honoring the technical commitments that attracted new investors. Scale back the electric focus and Audi or GM may reassess. Keep the rules unchanged and drivers, teams, and fans lose faith. This is the part that changes everything. What the April 20th summit decides about energy deployment could determine not just the rest of 2026, but whether the sport keeps its biggest backers. And that question leads directly to the verdict Section 7 reveals. The April 20th summit is the deadline that cannot slip. 6 proposed changes sit on the table. The super clipping threshold could jump from 250 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts, letting drivers charge while still on power. Qualifying might see its energy limit cut from 9 megajoules to 6 megajoules per flying lap, restoring the one fast lap that fans and drivers demand. Active aero restrictions could relax in qualifying trim. These are software tweaks. They can be done before Miami, but the harder fixes require hardware changes, and those cannot happen until 2027. Adrian Newey, widely regarded as the sharpest mind in aerodynamics, has reportedly pushed Aston Martin to back the most aggressive reform package at the table. The safety floor is non-negotiable. Any package must address the 50 km/h closing speed that put Oliver Bearman in the wall. Energy deployment harmonization is the minimum viable fix. Miami on on May 3rd becomes the first real-world test. If changes pass, we see validation on a street circuit. If they fail, the sport heads into known risks with no new tools. The data tells a completely different story about what is actually achievable in 8 days. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. Even if the symptoms get treated, does the disease remain? The core character of these cars, with half their power from a battery and aero that shifts mid-corner, does not change with a software patch. As this is the part that changes everything. What the April 20th verdict means for the soul of racing is the question Section 8 answers, and the answer will define not just the rest of 2026, but whether the sport can rebuild trust before it loses its most important voices. Max Verstappen's future in Formula 1 now hinges on a single meeting. The April 20th summit does not just decide regulation tweaks, it decides whether the sport's biggest star believes racing still matters. The championship is already unpredictable. Energy strategy now outweighs pure speed. Antonelli's 72-point lead as a rookie feels fragile when the rules themselves are in question. If the drivers who shape this sport lose faith, the title fight becomes secondary. And that is where this story gets complicated. Formula 1 has survived regulation crises before. The tire drama at Indianapolis in 2005, the awkward nose rules of 2014, the early hybrid era when Mercedes dominated and fans drifted away. Each time, the sport adapted. But this crisis is different. Past debates were about performance. This one is about safety. Drivers are not asking for faster cars. They are asking for cars that do not turn high-speed corners into lottery draws. 72% of fans demanding change is not a poll, it is a warning. The April 20th verdict will define more than the rest of 2026. It will test whether the FIA can listen, adapt, and prioritize safety over politics. If the package feels cosmetic, expect more private exit conversations. Verstappen will not be the only star weighing his future. Formula 1 does not need perfect rules. It needs rules that let the best drivers in the world do what they do best: race. Everything else is just engineering.